Thank you everyone for coming to our ArtStop today on Yinka Shonibare. My name is Alexander Jarman and I have the really fun job of managing the public programs here at the museum. Many of you came up the staircase on the left-hand side and of course heard that amazing opera voice coming out of the gallery. I want to make sure that everyone knows that Yinka Shonibare's works, we'll talk about the photograph in a second, the sculpture here, there's one that's not in this gallery, and that is the video that is playing in Gallery 20. That is that beautiful opera voice that you hear. And there's a lot of great information about that piece in these pamphlets we've created. So the first thing I'm going to do is just pass these around, and if you have not taken one already on your visit to the museum, be sure to take one. That's a still image on the front there from the video. First thing we need to do is set some context. So why are we here looking at these objects? Specifically, why are we looking at objects from the 21st century in the midst of a gallery with 16th, 17th, and 18th century? Well, first and foremost, Yinka Shonibare is dealing with actual historical subject matter from the 18th century. So we called the show Reimagined, or Imagined as the Truth. That's because Yinka Shonibare is reimagining actual historical characters, historical events. But this practice of the intervention, of taking contemporary art and putting it with art from the past is not a new thing. But it's an exciting thing that museums have been doing over the past 10, 15 years. And I think one of the most famous examples as of late is when Jeff Koons was invited to hang his work in the palace at Versailles. And so you had this amazing ornate architecture and then his big gaudy pop, hanging lobsters from the ceiling. Here it is a lot more subtle. Because, as I said, Yinka Shonibare is dealing with subject matter from the time period that all these, that many of these paintings are from. And here, this is going to be a really interesting multi-layered work when the title for it is 4 lines on the text panel. So we have the Age of Enlightenment, Gabrielle Émilie Letonnier de Breteau, Marquise du Châtelet, an actual historical figure. And her lover, who happened to be Voltaire, said of her that she was one of the most important thinkers of her age. She was one of the most important men of her age, whose only fault was that she was a woman. So right there, you can see from Voltaire's sentiment that she has a serious handicap to overcome, which is her gender, in that she's trying to be an intellectual. Here, I know Austin doesn't like it and Tommy doesn't like it when we get this close to the art, but here we have Principia Mathematica. That was her translation into French of Newton's Principles of Physics. She also sort of critiqued his work in that book and is actually the standard for Newton's work in French still to this day. Never published during her lifetime. Not published until 10 years after she died. Again, much of her work while she was alive was completely ignored. This comes from a series of work that Yinka Shonibare did called the Age of Enlightenment, and he took different figures from the Enlightenment period who had some sort of handicap in their life. And that's a little autobiographical, as Yinka Shonibare has some physical challenges of his own. And so you can see in very subtle ways how autobiography might seep into this work by a man of a woman. But let's get more into the subject matter here. So first of all, again, the context. You have this woman seated at her desk, with her tools of study, and you have that directly in front of our wonderful Goya painting. He's sitting at his desk with his book out. So it's this amazing relationship between the centuries, between works of art. Her dress is absolutely gorgeous, and it is authentic in style. It's appropriate to the period in terms of style. But of course, we take one look at it, and there's something a little off. We don't think that in the 18th century, the women were wearing this, what we now would associate with African fabric. The fabric itself is purchased by the artist in an open-air market in East London, I believe. And he recognizes that most of us will take one look at it and think about West Africa when we look at this fabric. The fabric is actually based on Indonesian batik design. And when the Portuguese went down, or sorry, the Dutch went down and started colonizing, at first trading, then colonizing South Asia, they ran into all these amazing new cultures, and one of the things they were really smitten with was this batik design. They took that design back to Europe, manufactured clothing with the designs en masse, and took it down to their brand new colonies in West Africa and started trading with the West Africans. So now this symbol of pride for many different West African nations can be understood as actually a colonial invention, a part of culture that was really transplanted by the colonizers onto the colonized. And that is the very subtle wit and subtle humor of Yinka Shonibare's work. To get back into his biography, he is an artist who was born in London, but went back with his family at age 3 to Nigeria, raised there until he decided to go to college, went back to London for college, and then went to graduate school at Goldsmiths, and has been based out of London ever since. So he's got a lot of interesting subject matter, as he considers himself a cultural hybrid. He considers himself, to be sort of living between this colonizer nation and colonized nationality. I want to bring everyone over to this photograph over here, so walk with me a little bit. And we're going to make sure that, Kristen, can you still see me? Are we good? Okay. It's okay. It's okay to be on camera. It's all right, unless you are like wanted by the police. So here we have this wonderful photograph, and the question that we get all the time is, are you sure this is not a painting? And it looks like this big dramatic narrative historical painting. We did put on the label right here. I'm sure all of you will recognize Géricault's The Raft of the Medusa. The Medusa is this frigate, and when it wrecks, the people who had the money, the nobility, the officers, most of them got off of the ship just fine. Everyone else was sort of left to fend for themselves. And when the survivors were finally found, it hit the newspapers. It was this big scandal. I want to talk more about the content, but I also want to give you some background on how this work was made. So I'm going to pass around this same image from the catalog so you can get really up close on that detail of the sails. Once again, we're dealing with what seems like sort of different subject matter. We've moved from the figural to this landscape historical scene here, but you can see the sails in the ship are, again, that same fabric that Yinka Shonibare has used in the dress over there. In the video, you'll also see the opera singer dressed in this fabric. And back to the story of the frigate, this ship was on an ambassador mission from France to North Africa, and the person who was captaining this ship had no business steering a boat, basically. He was appointed to his position because of his nobility, because of his status. It was an appointment by the monarchy, but it was not based on merit at all. And he did lead the ship into too shallow waters, and it crashes. Now, right there we have this dramatic moment with Géricault, the Raft of the Medusa, the survivors. They're in this neoclassical painting. Here we have the moment before the wreck. Right? Here we're on stormy seas. You can see right here there's one lifeboat that's lost in the waves right there. So maybe the ship has started to break up, or maybe people have started to try and abandon ship. This whole piece right here is actually a sculpture. This is a diorama. So you have these resin waves right here and this model ship. And then there is a painted backdrop that was put in back of the sculpture, and that's how the artist made the photograph. But this piece right here actually exists as its own sculpture, and so you can see that work without the painted backdrop just in a vitrine on its own. And so the artist is making these very complex, dynamic works, and then he's even sort of complicating their identity by reusing them multiple times. Once more, just to close up back to that idea of identity. Yinka Shonibare is really interested in opening up a dialogue about history. Traditionally, we think of history as being linear and attached to time. This thing happened, then this thing happened, then this thing happened, and that's how it goes. There's a lot of conversation right now in the contemporary art world about history being tied more to place than time. So a place can have all these multiple narratives happening in it. You and I are in the same place, and we're having our own different experiences, and we have our own histories and our own versions of the stories. And what happens if all of our versions of the story are true, and they all coexist together? So he wants to open up history from being this very solid, concrete, one viewpoint is what rules, to being more open and talking about how history is very messy. And history is just a version of the truth that we have more or less decided to accept. And so when you look at these pieces and you think about this artist reimagining the actual historical content, it's interesting to think that maybe, even though his viewpoint is 3 centuries removed from the actual historical event, that maybe his viewpoint is just as valid as other viewpoints that have been represented. Because here is an artist who is interested in the self-criticism of art. He's interested in how is art complicit in telling these historical narratives? How has Géricault's painting influenced what we thought about the Raft of the Medusa just as much as the newspapers of that time did? Yinka Shonibare, I do want to explain, sorry, I just said I was going to close. I want to say one more thing about him. His name. We do get a lot of questions about his name. Yinka Shonibare, MBE. And the MBE stands for Merit of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. It is still an honor that is given out, just as if President Obama was going to come and give you the Medal of Arts or the Medal of Freedom, Medal of Humanities. And you can work your way up within this structure, so you can become an officer of the British Empire. But because of his work in the field of art, he was bestowed this honor. And if there's any question how proud England is of him, he was also chosen as a cultural ambassador for the 2012 Olympics that just happened in London. So thank you for coming and listening to a little bit about Yinka Shonibare, and enjoy the rest of your day at the museum. Thank you.